just unbelievable.
Brenda K. Powell had lived in the picturesque city of Akron, Ohio, peacefully since her teens. After graduating from the University of Akron, she went on to work as a child life specialist in the hematology-oncology unit at the local children's hospital for the next 28 years. Selflessly dedicated, her obituary describes her as devoted unconditionally to the family she worked with and her own family alike. She founded the hospital's teen oncology program and always made time for her husband and children. Yet the life of this caring wife and mother was soon to be tragically cut short by none other than her own daughter. Sydney Powell, Brenda's teenage daughter, was described as a great student when she attended St. Vincent St. Mary High School in Akron. She played soccer and 1 year of lacrosse. She had great grades and a high grade point average. Her parents, Brenda and Steve, were very proud. When the time came for Sydney to go to college, together they selected Mount Union University because of its small campus, and also because Sydney wanted to be close to home. Its Alliance, Ohio campus was only an hour away from her parents' house. She won a presidential scholarship that included a tuition break, relieving some of the pressure of private school upon her parents, and started at college in the fall of 2018. She came home for breaks and kept in touch with her mother. Sydney and Brenda's close relationship was noted by those around them. Brenda was Sydney's best friend. The family trusted each other. They used the Life 360 app, which allowed its users to track the other's whereabouts at all times. How then did this close family unit fracture? Sydney had a track record of success. Having done so well in high school and having earned herself a scholarship, her parents had no cause to be concerned about her grades. Mount Union had an app they could use to review Sydney's progress at college, but they rarely used it. They did not want to invade Sydney's privacy by checking up on her without good reason. She didn't share any details of her performance at school, not even when she came home for the summer in 2019. Sydney took a summer job with the Akron Rubber Ducks, the local baseball team, working in the kids zone. She went back to campus that fall without sharing a word of the troubles she was facing or the troubles yet to come. Sydney came home again for the winter break, spending a cozy Christmas and New Year's at home with her family in Akron, as though nothing had gone wrong. In January 2020, she went back to Mount Union, but this time there was a problem. In December 2019, Sydney had become unenrolled. In the fall semester, she had failed 3 out of her 4 classes. As a result, Sydney received written notice of expulsion.
Ms. Gaffney, if you can take a look at that and let me know if you recognize what it is.
Yes.
Okay, what is that document?
This would be the letter indicating that Sydney was suspended.
Okay, so that's a suspension letter. That's a letter that's sent to students?
Yes.
Okay. And that directs them on who to contact if they want to appeal or to address what's going on?
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, who is that letter specifically to?
This is to Sydney.
Now, you mentioned that this letter of suspension is sent via certified mail. Is there a tracking system that Mount Union uses to ensure that that student has proper notice? Is there a signature?
There is a signature required.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that once a student is suspended, they wouldn't be allowed back into the dorms. Can you explain the process of who's allowed in the dorms and who's allowed to use Mount Union's facilities as a student?
So to live on campus, you have to be enrolled as a full-time student.
And part of that suspension, that student will lose access to all of those availabilities.
Yes.
Okay.
Nevertheless, she went back to Mount Union in January and continued this illusion of normalcy even with her roommate Lauren Curry, who was her best friend from high school. In late February, Sydney told Lauren that she would be moving away for a time to figure things out. In reality, Sydney had been asked to leave. In a personal meeting, college administrators had told her that she had to move out of her dorm and that her key card access would be terminated.
Ms. Gaffney, at some point did you yourself meet Sydney Powell?
I did.
Okay. And what happened? Were you able to contact Ms. Powell?
I was. And
Okay.
Sydney came over to the office.
Okay, can you describe that interaction?
I think when she first came in, I said, Sydney, there seems to be some confusion. It seems as though you haven't moved out of your residence hall yet, from what I can tell. But you're not enrolled this semester. You're not a student here this semester. And at first she replied to me that, oh, I am, but I'm still a student here. And that's when I actually addressed the fact that the suspension, I said, Sydney, you received a suspension letter that you signed for. And so we spoke a little bit further, and she said, well, yes, she had, but she had been hoping to get things changed or fixed, and so she had been trying to work things out.
So she did acknowledge that she knew about
She did
her
acknowledge
suspension.
then that she knew she was suspended.
When the administrators offered to call her parents to explain the situation, difficult it can be, she was adamant that she had already told them what was happening. The idea of the college contacting her parents directly about her own failure was visibly distressing. After having been a success in high school, she couldn't bear to disappoint them. Far from figuring things out, she spent late February paying cash for hotel rooms to maintain the illusion to her friends and to her parents that she hadn't been kicked out of college. Her parents initially suspected nothing. Sydney went to great lengths to disguise her academic situation, which was worsening by the minute. On February 25, 2020, Brenda texted Sydney asking, "Why do I always feel like you're scamming me? Just remember, you need to keep the grades to keep your scholarship." Sydney responded, "My grades are good, thank you very much." By this point, she'd been evicted from her dorm. But Brenda's momentary suspicion was not enough to see through Sydney's lies. The only clue was the college online portal. When Steve Powell, her father, tried to sign into the portal to send an additional check to cover tuition fees, it denied him access. He asked Sydney why it wouldn't let him into the portal.
Do you have any information that something might be going on with Sydney and Mount Union?
The only thing that I knew is when I tried to sign on to the like their whatever app that they have on the website, it kept kicking me out.
Why were you trying to get into that portal?
Seeing, because the 529 plan didn't cover all the tuition for the year, so I had to make a personal check.
Okay.
So I had to see how much that was.
Okay. And when you had difficulty logging onto that portal, what did you do?
I asked Sydney what was going on about it.
Okay, and what did she say?
There was a mistake with Mount Union,
Okay.
and she'd look into it.
Okay, and at that point you had no reason not to trust
Correct.
what she's telling you.
Correct.
Steve had no reason not to believe her. She had always been a trustworthy child with a history of academic success. No one could have expected what would happen next. On March 3, 2020, Steve received a call at work from Mount Union. Officials at the college had to speak to him as a matter of urgency. They informed him that Sydney was no longer enrolled at the college. When he asked how long this had been the case, all they said was, "You'd have to ask her."
I believe Mount Union called me. They called me, and the conversation was that Sydney wasn't enrolled anymore. And then I asked for how long, and they said, "You have to ask her."
Okay. And I'm sure that came as a shock to you.
Yes.
And again, they said you have to ask. I know it sounds cold, but they're saying you have to ask her because they can't give you any more information, right?
That was my assumption.
Steve checked the Life 360 app to find Sydney was at home. Shocked by the news that she'd been lying about her performance in college while he had been writing checks to pay for it, Steve left work to confront her.
What prompted you to go home, to leave work and go home?
Because I saw on the app she was home, which I thought was a little bit early.
Okay.
360 Life.
The 360 app showed that she was home.
Yes.
If someone on that app comes home, do you get like a little buzz or notification on your phone?
If it's set up, you can.
Okay. So did you just happen to see that on the 360 app, or did it give you like a
I
notification?
might have got a notification. I don't recall.
Okay. So you get a notification that Sydney's at home, correct?
Yes.
When you see that, you go home.
Correct.
All right. And why did you go home?
See why she was home.
Okay. Did you have any concern for her at that time?
Just because Mount Union said she wasn't enrolled, but no, I was just going to go home and see why she was home so early. And
Okay. And did you take your phone with you when you went home?
no,
And why not?
I just left it at work so the 360 app wouldn't show me coming home.
So that she couldn't use the same app to see him coming and avoid this necessary confrontation. Arriving at around 11:30, he found her alone at home. Sydney told him that she was merely having some trouble at college, but that she was still enrolled and still attending some classes with her friend and roommate Lauren. Steve responded with understanding. He told her that they'd get through this semester and that if she needed to take the summer off, they'd work through it.
So she told you she was essentially still enrolled, but just having some trouble?
I don't know if she used the word trouble, but
And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You tell me.
Yeah, she
What,
just-
what did she say?
she was, again, I don't remember the details, but I remember she said she was still going to some of her classes with her friend Lauren.
Do you remember telling her that, you know, you can't run away from your problems, you have to face them?
I said we'd go through, let's get through this semester, and if you needed to take the summer off or we would work through it. I remember she said, you know, all her friends have their shit together and she doesn't, and I told her, no, that's not true.
She said she didn't. Sydney said, I don't have my shit together, but my friends do.
Yeah, she didn't know what she wanted to do, it sounded like.
Sure.
She felt lost and afraid of disappointing her family. Unsure how to handle these emotions she'd kept hidden from him for so long, he suggested they call Brenda, who was at work at the Children's Hospital. Brenda decided to come home to talk to Sydney, and Steve made the fatal decision to leave before she got there. Brenda was an emotionally sensible and empathetic woman, more than capable of de-escalating highly emotional situations, as she had to do every day in her work with children and teenagers who had cancer. Steve couldn't be blamed for asking her to help with her daughter's sudden crisis. For the next hour, Brenda and Steve kept in touch via text messages. And at 12:41, Steve sent her the last text he would ever send her. "What did you discuss with Sydney?" Brenda would never respond. Brenda had left a phone message with the administrative office at Mount Union asking to discuss Sydney's situation. When college administrators Michelle Gaffney and John Fraser arrived at the office, they returned the call straight away. Phone records show that Brenda picked up the phone at 12:36:45.
Dean Fraser was sitting at his desk, and I was sitting next to it. He dialed. The phone was answered, and Mrs. Powell answered.
You say Mrs. Powell, is that Brenda who answered?
Brenda answered, yes.
And what did you tell Brenda at that time?
So Dean Fraser was speaking and simply said, Brenda, this is Dean Fraser. I'm sitting here with Michelle Gaffney, our associate dean of students. We're returning your call, and that's about as far as we got.
Did Brenda respond to that introduction at all?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
what did she say?
I think he asked, "Is this Brenda Powell?"
Oh, okay.
And she said yes, and then he identified himself.
Okay. And Miss Gaffney, what happened next?
There was a very large or a very loud sort of thud sound, like a pounding or a thud, accompanied by a pretty loud scream, and the scream might have actually been first, and then the thud.
Okay.
As I think about it, and then there was sort of an expulsion. The other sound that I heard at that same time, or right after, was sort of an expulsion of air, like the air was knocked out of somebody.
Okay.
I'd always heard that expression of the air being knocked, having the wind knocked out of you, but I didn't. That's actually what it sounded like. And then several more repeated thuds. I don't know how to describe the sound.
No, and that's okay. And you and Mr. Fraser could hear this from the other end of the phone.
From the other, it was on speakerphone, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear any communication during these thuds?
Just the screaming, and this, and so we were both talking into the phone, saying, what's happening? Are you okay? Do you need help? What's going on?
Yeah. Can you describe your mindset at this time?
I mean, it very definitely felt like someone was being attacked.
The call with the administrators dropped after an estimated 6 or 7 thuds and continual screaming. They called back and received no answer until the third attempt, when someone picked up at 12:40:15, only 3.5 minutes after the beginning of the attack, and a minute before Steve's final text message to his wife. Frazier, shaken by what they had just heard, managed to ask, "Brenda, is that you? Are you there?" A voice responded, "Yes, this is Brenda." But the voice was not Brenda. The voice was that of Sidney Powell.
Now, Ms. Gaffney, did you recognize that voice on the line?
Yeah,
Okay, was that Brenda
it
Powell?
was not Brenda.
Who did you recognize that voice to be?
I was sure it was Sydney. Both Dean Frazier and I looked at each other and sort of shook our heads at each other and said, that's not Brenda. And he then said, I don't, Sydney, I think this is you. This is not Brenda.
And what happened next?
The phone went dead.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, what did you do next?
We called the Akron police. But by that point, I had the phone number up and the address. And so we called the Akron police and indicated we felt there was some sort of situation at this house and that they needed to send someone right away.
They were on the phone, and there was a lot of screaming going on, so he couldn't really say if it was like a physical fight, but just heard like a lot of yelling and screaming going on. And then he tried calling back twice, and there was no callback.
In a single moment, a peaceful family home had become the scene of a crime. Impersonating her mother was not Sydney's only attempt at covering up what had happened. After the disastrous phone call, she set herself to staging the crime scene. She broke a window to make it look as though there had been a break-in, which would align with the story she would go on to tell the police, that there had been a break-in and her mother had told her to flee the house. But this scene was clearly staged. There was blood on the outside of the door near the broken window, suggesting it must have been broken only after the crime had been committed. After murdering her mother, she coldly and callously took steps to cover up her own guilt. At 12:51, Steve Powell received a call from a detective friend who had heard that police units were being dispatched to the Powell home. Steve immediately phoned his house and spoke to Sydney, who became hysterical when she heard that police were on their way and repeated the break-in story. Steve could only wait helpless at work as his family life broke apart at home. The police initially found Sydney hysterical. This hysteria soon evaporated, however, and she became catatonic, lying on the ground in the fetal position as the enormity of what she had done began to sink in. There was a cast-iron skillet on the floor in the master bedroom, alongside a bloodied steak knife. These implements of an ordinary domestic household, no doubt used by Brenda herself to cook family meals, had been weaponized against her. As the police examined the scene, the series of events only glimpsed by Steve and the college administrators over the phone became horribly clear. The forensic pathologist concluded that Brenda Powell had died as a result of multiple blunt and sharp force injuries. Sydney had hit her mother multiple times over the head with the heavy cast-iron skillet. She then fetched a steak knife and in a frenzy stabbed her mother repeatedly in the neck at least 23 times. Cuts and bruising to Brenda's face, arms, and hands suggest that she had attempted to defend herself from Sydney. Sydney, her beloved daughter, whose academic failures and emotional turmoil had until now been kept a secret. The revelation of this secret led to Sydney's eruption and Brenda's tragic death. No one denies that Sydney killed her mother. At trial, however, her attorneys contended that the attack had occurred in the middle of a psychotic break, meaning she could not comprehend that her actions were wrong. As evidence, they pointed to her catatonic state after the killing. They also suggested that her continued denial of her own reality, that she'd been kicked out of college, was in fact evidence of schizophrenia, and brought in 3 psychological experts to testify to this fact. Sydney had told one of them that she did not remember the attack at all. Her last memory of her mother, she said, was of sitting on the couch with her mother as she comforted Sydney. Sydney then got up and went into the basement. She said she did not remember anything further until the hospital after the attack. The prosecution pointed to Sydney's methodical staging of the scene as evidence of her mental fitness at the time. They called a further clinical psychologist as a rebuttal witness who testified that she had diagnosed Sydney with borderline personality traits and unspecified anxiety disorder. The psychologist concluded that Sydney was malingering, feigning mental unfitness in order to pervert the course of justice. Ultimately, the jury agreed. On September 20th, 2023, Sydney Powell was found guilty on all counts: purposeful murder, felony murder, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. She murdered her mother and attempted to cover it up. On September 28, 2023, Sydney Powell was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. She will be 38 years old by the time she is eligible for parole.
Ms. Powell, is there anything you want to say to me at this time? All right. Thank you very much. First of all, to the victims, to the family and friends, I am terribly sorry for your loss here. I cannot imagine what you have been through. I have received and read all of the letters that have been sent to me. I have considered the evidence that was brought into evidence at the trial, the statements of counsel, and all of the information that is before me at this time. Based upon the facts and circumstances of this case and in consideration of the relevant sentencing factors, including seriousness and recidivism, and applying the minimum sanction that the court has determined will protect the public and punish the offender without imposing an unnecessary burden on state and local resources, the court imposes the following sentence. On count 1, ma'am, I sentence you to an indefinite sentence of 15 years to life in the Ohio Department of Corrections. On count 4 of the indictment, I sentence you to 3 years in the Ohio Department of Corrections. Those two sentences to be run concurrent with and not consecutive to each other. Ma'am, understand that you have a right to appeal this decision, and that notice of appeal must be filed within 30 days of the sentencing judgment entry. Your attorney has indicated to me that you are without funds to hire an attorney to represent you for appeal. Is that correct? And you wish for me to appoint counsel to represent you? Yes. All right. I will do that, and we will try and get that done before you leave the Summit County Jail. Ma'am, I will not fine you. I will not assess you court costs in this matter. Good luck to you, Ms. Powell. Thank you. We're adjourned.
In Sydney's efforts to conceal her own academic failures and her paranoid fear of disappointing her parents, Sydney only derailed her life further and caused an unimaginable tragedy that ripped her family apart. What are your thoughts on this tragic story? Do you believe Sydney's fate was